Hi everyone, and a big welcome to ClientEarth Live 2025 in Review. My name is Helen James, ClientEarth's Global Head of Communications, speaking to you from London, and I'm really excited to be your host today. I'd also love to know where all of you are dialing in from as well, so please say hello to us in the chat. 2025 has been what some might call a dramatic year. We've had some environmental rollbacks, but on the positive side, we've seen some major precedent-setting court wins for people and planet. And today's session is an opportunity to hear from ClientEarth's experts about some of our most ambitious work, our landmark victories, and our impact from this year. We'll also share some areas of our work that you might not get to hear about very often. And our experts with us today are Laura Clarke, ClientEarth CEO, Agata Szafraniuk, Head of ClientEarth in Poland, Robert Clarke, Senior Lawyer, Accountable Finance, Tim Guanzon, Acting Associate Director in Japan and Southeast Asia, and Nieves Noval, Lead of Sustainable Food Systems. Now, before we dive into the session, I just want to give you a few points on housekeeping. Firstly, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen at any time during the session, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function and a member of our team will help you. We should also let you know that this session is being translated into Spanish with a live interpreter. If you'd like to use that service, please click on the interpretation icon on the Zoom toolbar and then select the language, and you should be able to hear the interpreter with the original audio decreasing in volume. Otherwise, there are also automated subtitles and captions in multiple languages, and there are further instructions in the chat if you need any guidance on using that as well. I should also let you know that this webinar is recorded. Finally, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today and hear about the work that we've been doing in 2025, as well as some of our reflections about what might be to come. First of all, to the virtual stage, I'm incredibly delighted to invite our CEO, Laura Clarke, to share some of her reflections on the year. Laura, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Helen. And hi, everyone. It's so great to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. It's wonderful to have you all join us today. And I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from our experts about some of our work things that we have achieved in 2025. I think most of you are probably familiar with ClientEarth, and that's why you've joined this webinar today. But let me just give the briefest possible introduction to our work and our theory of change. And essentially what we do, ClientEarth, it does what it says on the tin. The Earth is our client. So everything we do is about protecting our Earth, our planet, and the people on it. And we use the law in lots of different ways to try and accelerate the change we need to tackle climate change, protect nature, biodiversity, and stop pollution. And we work in different ways. So we work to strengthen the law. We advocate to get the right laws in place, because when you get the right laws in place, you change the rules of the game. We work to build the field. So we work alongside community groups, partner organizations, indigenous people, so that more and more people globally are using the law to defend the environment and uphold their rights. And then we also do strategic litigation. That's probably what we're most known for, bringing the right cases at the right time to hold governments and corporates accountable for their environmental impacts and commitments, but also to set precedent and change mindsets and behaviors. So we strongly believe that the law is a really important tool in accelerating the urgent action needed, and it can get us, used in the right way, it can get us to positive tipping points more quickly. So we are about 300 people globally, experts, including lawyers, legal and policy experts, working across more than 60 countries and always working in partnership with other organizations. And critically important, our work is supported by thousands of dedicated individuals like you, without whom our work wouldn't be possible, because it's entirely supported by philanthropic donations. So Let me just set the scene a little bit for my brilliant colleagues to then talk in detail about their work. And it's clear in 2025, halfway through the critical decade, that we're living in an era of climate consequences. From the wildfires in LA at the start of the year to the devastating floods in Asia this last week, which have claimed more than 1,700 lives and caused untold damage. There is every week we are reminded that climate consequences are with us now. Extreme heat, infectious diseases, loss of livelihoods, the cost of food going up. So it's tough. And at the same time, of course, the political context is more challenging. And there's polarization, geopolitical tensions. But of course, it's not political to want to breathe clean air, to drink clean water, to live in a livable, safe climate. And we know from lots of different polling that 80% of people want climate action. Now, at a time when government action is less certain, business action is less certain, the regulatory framework is less certain, the law can really help chart a path to a better future. So we have had an incredible year at ClientEarth, and it's all thanks to your support. So I'm going to highlight a few things and then my colleagues will unpack some of that. So we've had a huge focus on oceans. We had the UN Oceans Conference that we attended, but we've been doing so much to tackle bottom trawling in marine protected areas, to tackle overfishing by Spanish companies in West African waters. And we've taken action against JP Morgan Chase and other banks to protect whales from a planned fossil fuel shipping terminal in a Gulf of California UNESCO site. We've also on the nature side continued our focus on forests, forest governance and forest protection. So we've been supporting training to empower forest communities in Indonesia to secure their rights and protect forest ecosystems. And we've been working in Ghana to support local community groups to improve forest governance, support community-based conservation, and ensure supply chain integrity so that timber supply chains are not complicit in any way in deforestation. We've also been working a lot to support the energy transition. Agata will talk a bit more about our work in Poland. That's both about tackling big oil, the fossil fuel industry, but also the regulatory reform needed for the renewable energy transition. We've put people at the center of our work. It's so important, both in terms of the impacts, and Nieves will talk about our work tackling the pollution from industrial pig farming, but also putting people at the center in terms of driving that change, whether that's the Spain case that Nieves will talk about, or our work in Colorado, working with Colorado landowners in a class action to tackle unplugged oil and gas wells, what we call zombie oil wells. It's also from the local community side looking out globally. It's been a huge year for international law, with the ICJ, the highest court in the world, giving its advisory opinion on what states' obligations are to tackle climate change and protect people from climate change. We've also, encouraged by that, continued our focus on government action, with the UK government in producing an improved climate plan following our challenge. And we've continued on the corporate side to combat those who seek to delay or obstruct climate action. Now, a Paris court this year found that Total Energies misled the public with greenwashing advertising and its claim to be a major player in the energy transition, when, of course, it wasn't. Now, Rob will speak more about that. And then finally, for those of you that are interested in plastics and the work to tackle plastic pollution, we are yet again challenging INEOS, Europe's biggest plastics project. So alongside partners, we're fighting to stop INEOS from building what would be Europe's biggest plastics facility in the port of Antwerp. So that's a whistle-stop tour through some of our work. It's, of course, not exhaustive. My colleagues are going to talk more in detail about some particular cases and successes that we have had. But it's really clear that none of this work would be possible without your interest, without your engagement, without your support and financial contributions. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for continuing to support us. And I wish you a wonderful end of the year. Thanks very much. And I'm going to hand back to Helen, who's going to chair the rest of the session.
Thanks so much, Laura. It was really interesting to hear about the progress that's been made in 2025. So really a big thank you for those messages of hope. Now, Laura talked about the gains that have been made in the energy transition in 2025 and the impact of accelerating renewables and phasing out fossil fuels, for example, on health by reducing air pollution. And our next speaker will expand a little bit on what that has meant in Poland. So now I'd like to invite to the virtual stage Agata Szafraniuk. Agata is the head of ClientEarth in Poland, which has been operating for more than 15 years. Agata oversees the work of our Polish office, and has been with ClientEarth for more than a decade. She leads our nature protection efforts across Poland and Central and Eastern Europe, from forests and rivers to biodiversity policy and EU advocacy. Before joining ClientEarth, Agata worked as an environmental lawyer specialising in EU law and cross-border conservation. And at ClientEarth, she focuses on strategic litigation, building coalitions, and driving systemic change. Outside of the office, you might find her somewhere in the wild, somewhere by a free-flowing river with a pack raft. And if you didn't know what that was, like me, it's a tiny ultralight boat. Now, Agata, we'd love to hear more about our work in Poland and why you do this work. So, Agata, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So, hello everyone, I'm Agata. Warm greetings from sunny Warsaw. So, as you heard, I love being in nature, usually very close to some river. And this always reminds me why our work matters. Protecting nature takes good law, good decisions, and especially people willing to stand up for these places. And this is exactly why our Polish office exists. Before I share what we do today, I want to briefly reflect on why ClientEarth opened its office in Poland 15 years ago. There were three main reasons. First, Poland was planning a huge wave of new coal power plants. Second, it is home to some of Europe's most extraordinary ecosystems, like Białowieża Forest, the Biebrza wetlands, and countless free-flowing rivers. Third, as a young EU member state, strengthening environmental litigation here was a fast way to build civil society. And in the years that followed, we proved that vision was right. We stopped the biggest new coal power plants in Europe. We defended the Białowieża forest in one of the most important environmental cases in EU history. 15 years ago, nobody would have believed that. But as our founder James Thornton once said, if you can make it in Poland, you can make it everywhere. He meant that if we could use the law to transform environmental decisions in a country so dependent on coal, so politically complex, and so rich in natural resources, then this model could work anywhere. And he was right. Today, we work on forests, rivers, biodiversity, climate, clean air, public engagement, and corporate accountability. We use the law to make sure nature has a voice, and this voice is heard. Let me take you through a few examples, especially from the last year, which shows how far we have come. One of our first big fights was a massive coal plant that would have locked the region into decades of emissions. We challenged its permits and we won. The project stopped and helped shift Poland from coal forever to a future we can choose. A few years later came another milestone, the Ostrołęka case. ClientEarth acted as a shareholder of the energy company and challenged the resolution to build a 1.2 billion euro coal plant. We argued that it ignored clear financial and environmental risks. And court agreed, signaling that coal no longer made economic sense. Not long ago, air pollution in Poland was treated almost as normal. That's why we challenge weak air quality plans and help introduce new regulations, including the one that made Krakow, that you see on the left side on the slide, the first major city to ban burning coal and wood in home heating. We were so proud of that moment that we even put a billboard, which you see on the right side of the slide, calling the local mayor a hero, because at that time, taking action on smog was heroic. A symbolic case came from Zakopane, a mountain resort that charged a climate fee despite having extremely poor air quality. We supported one determined tourist that you see on the right side on the slide. And this year, actually, after 10 years of our legal fight, the Supreme Administrative Court ruled the fee illegal. It is a small story, but I think with the powerful message, persistence pays off. And now our cleaner work has expanded dramatically. This year, the European Court of Human Rights accepted our cleaner cases we supported, where we're representing individuals. You can see them here on the slides. We also filed a landmark lawsuit against the Polish government on behalf of two asthma patients, a 55-year-old man and a 5-year-old boy that you can see also on the slide. Also this year, the European Commission referred Poland to the Court of Justice of the European Union for blocking access to justice. And this shows how far we have come, from fixing local plans to shaping European and almost human rights law. When we start working on renewables, Poland had 0 prosumers. Now there are over 1 million. We helped shape the rules that made this possible. And now our office is even a prosumer too. What we are doing now is pushing for energy communities, a cooperative, so clean energy becomes accessible to everyone in Poland. We also know that people need stories, not only regulations. At COP24, which was happening in Poland, we created the last season, inspired by Vivaldi, reminding that the climate has also its seasons, and we cannot lose any of it. It formed part of our campaign pushing Bełchatów, so it's Europe's largest coal plant, to face its climate impact. We also produced a documentary with the title "It's Okay to Panic," showing that fear can be the beginning of an action. And to strengthen the legal framework, we launched the first climate lawsuits in Central and Eastern Europe, representing 5 individuals demanding stronger climate action. Our defense of the Białowieża forest was one of the most emotional chapters of our work, especially for me, as I was leading this case. This unique ecosystem faced intensive logging, and we spent years protecting it through court filings, political negotiations, work with the UNESCO, European Commission, UN, and we even faced the state forest, who was responsible for logging, physically blocking access for us to the forest. But we documented the damage, brought the truth to the light, and shifted public perception. This fight influenced EU law and inspired movements protecting old-growth forests across the region, like in Romania. And on the legal side, it led to 2 rulings of the Court of Justice of the European Union, which still protect Polish and EU forests today. And also just last month, as a result of our almost 9 years legal fight, the Aarhus Convention Committee, which is a UN body, confirmed that Polish society must have a real voice in how forests are managed. It is a long, emotional story, but with a true happy ending. Last years were also a turning point in our work with companies. We achieved a historic settlement in our first greenwashing case in Poland. Coal sold was as an EcoP coal, and the company agreed to drop the misleading branding entirely, which was a big win for cleaner and honest communication. We obviously had also a campaign on that, including some kind of billboards in the metro that you can see on the left side about this misleading communication. We also filed a groundbreaking complaint against Nestle Poland just a couple months ago for misleading plastic neutrality claims. Their Polish brand, Nałęczowianka, which is a water brand, water in the plastic bottles, used slogans suggesting single-use plastic has no environmental impact. Negotiations failed, so we filed the lawsuit because companies must be honest about what their products do to the planet. And 15 years ago, we were a small office facing an enormous task. Today, we shape national law, EU policy, and human rights cases in Strasbourg. We have been present at every stage of Poland's environmental transition, and we are just getting started. And to all of our supporters watching today, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your trust makes this work possible, even thousands of kilometers away in Poland. And because of you, we have changed laws, we won landmark cases and protected places that truly matter. And these victories belong to all of us, and especially to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Agata. It was really interesting to hear about the impact of the Poland team over the last 15 years and your latest case against Nestle as well. At ClientEarth, we've been aware for a long time that companies can sometimes employ misleading and unlawful tactics to distract, delay, or even derail climate action. And this leads really nicely into our next speaker. But before I introduce him, I'd like to remind you all watching to leave any comments or questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. But now I'd like to invite Rob Clarke, Senior Lawyer for Accountable Finance, to our virtual stage. Rob works in the Accountable Finance team, which develops legal strategies targeting harmful financing, greenwashing, and other issues in the financial sector. Rob has been at ClientEarth for 4 years, and before that, he was a lawyer in a commercial law firm in London, focusing on tax, investment funds, and ESG. At ClientEarth, Rob leads our work on transition planning, financial markets, and greenwashing in the financial sector. Now, Rob, can you tell us a little bit more about ClientEarth's work to hold corporations to account, and in particular, bring us up to date on our efforts to challenge greenwashing in the fossil fuel sector?
Thank you, Helen, and hi everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to talk to you all today. I think what I love about this area of work is that the law allows us to go toe to toe with major businesses and financial institutions and powerful regulators to call out misunderstandings of the law and false narratives and uphold obligations that lead to better outcomes for climate, nature, and human well-being. And the ability of the law to do that is something I personally had lost touch with early in my career. But there's no better home for it than ClientEarth. And it's really clear that it's important to so many of you as well. And we couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much. And thank you for being here. As Helen said, I'm part of a ClientEarth team that uses the law to push for a more sustainable financial system. But today I'm here mainly to talk about our work fighting fossil fuel related greenwashing. I'm standing in for some really wonderful colleagues that lead this work. So I'll do my best to give a good account of it. And at the end, I'll just make a quick link with some of the work we've done in the financial sector. So first some context, and then I'll come on to some court cases we've supported in this area. Right back in 2019, ClientEarth began to consider how the law could be used to tackle the emerging problem of fossil fuel greenwashing. We know fossil fuels are the dominant cause of climate change. And now we understand better than ever that there has been a massive organized information campaign by the largest oil and gas companies right back from the 1970s onwards to cast doubt on climate change science and slow down any shift away from fossil fuels. More recently, this has shifted to those companies promoting themselves as part of the solution. So climate denial has morphed into something else. It's morphed into greenwashing. Our early action, we knew that there were long-standing legal rules, and they're common to many jurisdictions, that prohibit misleading commercial conduct. And that includes laws to protect consumers and investors from false or misleading claims. So we began to take legal action and focusing on the key misleading messages we saw coming from the fossil fuel industry. First, we brought a complaint to the UK's responsible business watchdog against the British energy company BP about their green energy ad campaign, And in response to our complaint in 2020, BP retracted those ads. Second, we partnered with investigative journalists, DSMOG, and with the support of our own communications experts, we conducted an in-depth study of 9 fossil fuel companies on their green advertising. And in 2021, we published this as the greenwashing files. We were seeing the same types of claim made over and over. Really highly polluting companies driving climate change would misrepresent their own business. They'd claim they're transitioning to net zero by 2050. And second, they'd promote a variety of false or exaggerated solutions to the massive continued use of fossil fuel products. The type of false solution we're talking about includes offsetting, so ideas like carbon neutral gas, airline flight and things like that, promoting green fuels as a solution, things like biofuels and hydrogen, when those things were only really ever going to play a small part. Also promoting fossil gas as a transition or low carbon fuel, and in other contexts, promoting recycling as a solution to plastic, which is made from fossil fuels. And each of these narratives obstructed the real and urgently needed solutions that do exist, like moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, electrification of heating and transport, and reusable packaging. And they weren't just in oil and gas company advertising. Airlines, automotive companies, major plastic producers were all repeating the same false narratives. So onto the court cases. We knew we couldn't ourselves get widespread court orders to prevent every instance of fossil fuel advertising that was misleading, but we could get the key precedents in place, and they could be used to build wider action and stop greenwashing from taking root. So from 2022, we've supported cases under EU consumer protection law, and we've been notching up wins. We supported a case by Dutch campaigners Fossil Free, which demonstrated that the airline KLM's advertising was unlawful in its promotion of offsetting sustainable fuels and its claim to be tackling climate change and getting to net zero by 2050. That case became a key legal precedent with law firms all over Europe telling their clients what it meant. In October this year, another case by our partners Greenpeace France, Friends of the Earth France, and Notre Affaire 2, which we supported, was successful against the French fossil fuel giant Total Energies. That company's claim to be transitioning and aiming for net zero by 2050 was found by the Paris court to be misleading and unlawful. And that's the first time an oil major's claim to be tackling climate change has been proved unlawful in court, a really important precedent. The company ruled that the court had misled consumers by giving the impression it was part of the solution to climate change, despite continuing to promote and sell more fossil fuels. Those claims had to be removed, and the company had to put a rectification notice on its website, flagging the judgment to any visitors. Both of those judgments are key precedents in the EU and beyond, and we've seen a big ripple effect. Off the back of the KLM case, EU consumer groups brought an EU-wide regulatory complaint against 19 airlines. And last month, a network of 27 consumer regulators, one from each EU country, forced a settlement with 21 airlines to stop making the same claims. And we'd hope to see the same kind of response in the aftermath of the Total judgment. In other contexts, there's more to come. As Agata mentioned, we have a court case against Nestlé to achieve a key precedent. And in relation to plastic recycling, Coca-Cola has already offered consumer regulators some concessions on how it talks about its recycling and sustainability claims. If I've got time, just a very quick note on the financial sector is that greenwashing is really important there too. We know that many people care about where their savings go, and they think that the environmental impact of investment should be taken into account. We also know there's a huge need for finance to flow where it needs to go to support transition. And if those things align, the money should get where it needs to go. But if greenwashing gets in the way, that will be slowed down, and the support for harmful activities will continue. We've confronted this issue as well. In late 2024, we submitted a complaint to the French financial regulator about the investment giant BlackRock. Using analysis from our partners Reclaim Finance, we identified 18 investment funds sold as sustainable in France, but containing billions of dollars of fossil fuel investment. In our view, that was misleading. Just like in consumer communications, there are rules that require marketing to investors to be clear, fair, and not misleading. We didn't see evidence of the public enforcement we wanted from the French regulator, but in March this year, BlackRock dropped sustainability-related terms from many of its funds and changed the rules of many others to exclude fossil fuel investments. That included 14 of the 18 funds we'd focused on. It was a time of regulatory change with new EU rules tightening up the naming of funds too. So there are some positive signs of change there. And the simple message really is that these things are linked. If the claims of oil majors to be tackling climate change are unlawfully misleading, we also need to look at how those claims are passed on in relation to investments in those companies. And that's how we approach the work. But I'll just end by saying thank you again. We couldn't do any of this without your support. And I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Rob. Fantastic to hear about that win against TotalEnergies, and it'll be really interesting to see the ripples of that win in 2026 as more courts take note of that precedent. Now, next, I'd like to invite to our virtual stage Tim Guanzon. Tim is Acting Associate Director for Japan and Southeast Asia at ClientEarth. She leads our energy and nature work in the region, and before joining ClientEarth, Tim led the energy legislative team of the Philippine Senator, providing support for the passage of 11 new energy laws to include legislation on microgrids and electrical vehicles. At ClientEarth, Tim specializes in energy regulation and markets, working towards addressing energy regulatory barriers to renewable energies. And also Tim has a dog named Judge Solo and two cats named IG88 and R2D2. Now, Tim, I'd love to know more about your pets, but instead I better ask you about your highlights of 2025 and what's to come in 2026. Tim, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helen. Yes, an ode to Star Wars. I'm a big fan of Star Wars. So, konbawa, magandang gabi, and salamat sore to all our friends and supporters in the Philippines, Japan, and Indonesia. I'm Tim Guanzon. I'm currently from the Philippines, and I think you've been monitoring the news in the past months. The Philippines has been ravaged by a series of super typhoons as well as flooding. And climate change is very close to my heart because I do see it in the day-to-day in the Philippines. So maybe just to give an overview of our work in Asia, because the way we work in Asia, specifically Japan and Southeast Asia, is very different from the way we work in other jurisdictions. So in Japan and Southeast Asia, our work is more collaborative. We work with governments, with the private sector, with non-government organizations and local communities in driving a just energy transition that benefits people and planet, taking into account the development goals and the economic growth targets of the jurisdictions that we work in, and of course, whilst protecting people and planet. So our focus countries in Japan and Southeast Asia are Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So why these three countries for now? So as we know, Japan is the fourth largest economy in the world, and it also has considerable fossil fuel investments in the region. Indonesia is the largest economy in Southeast Asia, and the Philippines is the fastest growing economy in Southeast Asia. Both of these countries have high percentage of coal in their energy mix, and they're also both part of the Coral Triangle, and there's high biodiversity in these countries as well as high potential for critical minerals that are needed for the energy transition. So with that context, in Japan and Southeast Asia, our work focuses on energy and nature. In energy, there are three main things that we do. So first, we drive private action and investment towards net zero using corporate and financial legal tools. Second, we create enabling energy regulations to accelerate renewable energy, scale up, and fossil fuel scale down. And the third one is we build a legal community of climate advocates. And in nature, our focus areas are forest governance, sustainable critical minerals,
marine biodiversity conservation, and achieving the 30 by 30 targets to protect 30% of terrestrial and marine areas by 2030 in these countries. Now, just to give a few highlights of the work that we do. So most of our work is really behind the scenes and in partnership with other NGOs on the ground. So maybe in Japan, we'll start. If we can click on, yes. So earlier this year, the Commonwealth Climate and Law Initiative issued legal analysis on directors' duties and obligations on climate change, and this is specifically for Japanese directors. And we provided our inputs to these important piece of work. And this is important because it's important that climate is integrated into governance of corporates and financial institutions in Japan. And also this year, as part of one of our goals in building a legal community of climate advocates, we held a lawyers' night discussing the implications of the ICJ advisory opinion on the obligations of states when it comes to climate change. So in Japan, as also this year, there was a win, not just for ClientEarth, but for all the ecosystem partners who've been working on shareholder resolutions because JFE Steel and Nippon Steel have announced that they're going to convert their blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces. And that's really a result of our work on shareholder climate resolutions together with the broader ecosystem in Japan, I think since 2021. And in Indonesia, so in Indonesia, we started our forest governance work actually since 2019. But this year, together with our partners, we held a training with the Ministry of Forestry, focusing on the ASEAN guiding principles on social forestry and the national legal frameworks on social forestry and what are the gaps when you compare these frameworks with the realities of IPL, of indigenous peoples and local communities on the ground. We've also started our energy regulatory engagement as well as our corporate and financial engagement in Indonesia this year. One other thing that we do is we do have green legal clinics wherein we partner with universities to train the next generation of environmental lawyers. And we're happy to share that this year we had a workshop with the University of Indonesia with the possibility, hopefully, of establishing a green legal clinics in Indonesia next year. And lastly, in the Philippines, we've been working behind the scenes together with government agencies, specifically the Energy Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy, on how we can have policies that would accelerate renewable energy and also that would enable early co-retirement. So early this year, we produced a legal toolkit together with the regulator on how to strengthen transparency for power procurement. This is in relation to PPAs. And also this year, we were recognized by the Department of Energy as global and climate energy experts as we have been providing background technical legal assistance to them for the past 3 years. On a final note, we will actually be receiving an award from the Department of Energy next week during their Sustainability Awards, recognizing our efforts in helping spur renewable energy development in the Philippines. In 2026, we're really hoping to deepen our energy and our corp and financial work, as well as our nature work in these 3 countries. And we thank you for your continued support. And of course, we would not have been able to do it without the support, not only from all of you, but also from all our partners in the region. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tim. I'll be really excited to see what's to come as your team rolls out the nature strategy next year. And protecting people and nature is the theme of our next speaker, who will tell us about an important precedent set this year in Europe. Before I pass to her, a quick reminder to add your questions and comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Now, Nieves Noval is Senior Environmental Lawyer who currently leads the Food Systems legal team in ClientEarth. Her work focuses on designing and driving strategic litigation to challenge the dominant power structures in EU food systems and to advance environmental protection and justice. Before joining ClientEarth 8 years ago, Nieves had already worked for 10 years as a litigation lawyer and as a lecturer in litigation. Her professional path is guided by a commitment to justice, compassion, and meaningful impact, and by the belief that the law can be a tool for real transformation. Now, Nieves, I'm going to pass to you now. Can you tell us more about your highlight of 2025 and why it was so monumental?
Thank you, Helen, and thank you to my colleagues for such inspiring contributions, and to all of you for being here today. Just to briefly introduce myself, for as long as I can remember, protecting nature has been a deep passion for me, and I'm sure most of you can relate to this, but I never imagined that this could ever become my work. I knew ClientEarth's work, and to me they always felt like these extraordinary European lawyers that frankly I thought would never be possible in Spain. So I already had 10 years of experience, but when the Spanish office was opened and the first lawyer's position was advertised in Spain, I didn't care a second for this being a junior position. I prepared endlessly because I decided that this job had to be mine. And somehow it happened. And that's why being here today and having your attention truly feels like a privilege for me. So this session brings me a sense of grounding in a world overflowing with worrying climate news, from biodiversity loss to extreme temperatures, to increasing pressures on communities and environmental deregulation across the world. It's so easy to forget that real change is happening. In legal work, progress usually happens quietly until one day, a single moment that shifts the course of things. And that moment does not just transform a legal outcome, it can transform lives, landscapes, ecosystem, and our sense of what is possible. So today I want to share one of those moments when everything changes. It's a Szafraniuk case launched together with Friends of the Earth and CECU, which is above all a real example of hope. We can move to the next slide, please. As part of our food system strategy, one of our priorities is addressing the impacts generated by intensive livestock farming and protecting rural communities. And of course, we had to work in Spain, which is one of the largest livestock exporters, EU and worldwide. This slide brings us to a Limia region, such a beautiful region, full of water, life, and biodiversity, a place where you would expect to feel peace and nature. But when you arrive in Limia, what you feel is something very different. You don't hear animals, you don't hear a living ecosystem. What you see are more than 400 industrial livestock installations surrounding small villages and lining the river. Next slide, please. On the left, you can see the village of Asconchas, that small cluster of houses just by the road. It's less than 100 meters from the reservoir, and this is where our claimants live. In the middle, just above the river, you can see one example of more than 400 industrial livestock facilities in the area. And on the right, you can see the consequence, this severe contamination of the Limia River. The water is literally green. Next slide, please. So when we started looking into what was happening in Limia, we found a community that had been fighting completely alone for years. And when I say a community, I mean just 24 people, 24. An aging rural population, families who love so much their village and their river. They had collected water samples on their own during more than 10 years, sent these samples to scientists, and filed more than 100 administrative complaints without a lawyer and without any kind of support, and they never received a response. On the left, let me introduce you to Pablo, one of our claimants, the president of the neighborhood association, and truly the driving force behind the case. And here is Merche at the center, another of our claimants. She runs a small appliance shop facing the reservoir, and she lives here with her husband and her children. And she is the heart of this case. They told us about headaches, respiratory problems, unbearable smells. They could not open their windows or use the water. They were living with shame about their homes and with a deep sense of institutional abandonment. Next slide, please. But when we carry out independent scientific analysis, what we discovered was far more serious than what we imagined. It was massive pollution coming from the liquid waste of hundreds of thousands of animals kept indoors, called manure. This manure ends up in the river and on the land, and from there it pollutes the soil and aquifers, creating a devastating toxic cocktail. Extremely high levels of nitrates and phosphorus, toxin-producing bacteria, including microcystins, and bacteria resistant to antibiotics. And in the summer heat, these contaminants evaporate and became aerosols, so people were also breathing them from their homes. Next slide, please. So we commissioned a medical report whose findings were devastating. The community was exposed to serious threats, increased risk of cancer, liver damage, respiratory problems, gastrointestinal illnesses, and infections linked to multi-resistant bacteria. During the trial, the medical expert turned to the authorities directly and addressed them saying, this is already a health risks situation. You will decide, public authorities, whether to act or not. But if you do nothing, this will become a public health crisis. And this marked a turning point. And in that moment, I realized we could win the case. Next slide, please. And in the face of this, the authorities repeatedly failed to do the most basic things the law required. They didn't carry out proper inspections or adopt control measures, and they did not activate prevention mechanisms. And this inaction breached multiple environmental laws, more than 12. But for us, the key point was this: the situation had gone far beyond environmental violations. We argued that it also violated fundamental rights, the right to life, the right to private and family life, and the right to property, linked to the right to a healthy environment. Next slide, please. So we went to court against the public authorities because they are the ones responsible for enforcing the law and protecting people's fundamental rights. We went to court with the testimonies of this brave community who spoke about feeling isolated, about having lost their dignity, feeling that their home was no longer a safe place. Imagine that sensation. And they won, and we all won. This is the first judgment in Europe to recognize that pollution from industrial livestock farming can violate fundamental rights. And it recognized the rights of rural communities to life, to private and family life, and to property. And the authorities were ordered to suspend the new farms, restore the reservoir, guarantee clean water, investigate the health risk, and compensate the residents. This case already had major impacts. It opened a debate on industrial livestock, shifting the narrative from just an environmental issue to being a matter of public health, justice, and fundamental rights. And something extraordinary happened. The community was empowered. People who had felt invisible for years are now being heard by the media, by institutions, and in their own region. And we are already being contacted by other communities who want to defend their rights in the same way. And this shows something essential. Environmental law is not simply about placing obstacles to development. It establishes the conditions so that development does not take place at the cost of people's health, destruction of ecosystems, or the violation of fundamental rights. Next slide, please. And the As Conchas win is not just an isolated case or the end of the story. Our focus remains clear in food systems, in transforming food systems. We need to protect fundamental rights, to challenge harmful subsidies and unfair practices, to ensure environmental laws are enforced, and working with communities and farmers at the center to build real accountability. And if we can move to the next slide to close. And to close, I would like to share the words of one of our claimants. She didn't want her picture to be here, but her name is Anna. And she wrote us a very moving letter out about this victory. Among other things, she said, "During years, we felt forgotten, unable to save our rivers or even ourselves. Thank you for giving us back hope and for reminding us that we cannot give up, not for ourselves and not for those who come after us." And I want to extend these words to all of you here today, because our work, these cases, these outcomes, these moments of protection and dignity simply would not exist without our wider community. The people who partner with us, who fund our work, who follow our work, who support it in any way, who speaks about it, helping to create this understanding and legitimacy. Because a case that no one hears about or talks about remains just a case, but is not a driver for change. So thank you for everything we have made possible together this year, and for everything we will continue to build together.
Thank you so much, Nieves. That was it. That was incredible. So let's bring this session to a close. A huge thank you to Laura, Agata, Rob, Tim, and Nieves. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for being here today. Your support is really what makes our work possible.